Much indeed for joining us. In your article in the Hindu published on 21st August entitled "I'd Rather Not Be Anna," you've raised many doubts about the Anna Hazare campaign. Now that the movement is over and the crowds have come and we've seen the massive size of those crowds, do you continue to be skeptical, and if so, why?
Well, it's interesting that everybody seems to have gone away happy and everybody is claiming a massive victory. I'm kind of happy to, relieved, I'd say, mostly because I'm extremely glad that the Jan Lokpal bill didn't go through Parliament in its current form. Yes, I'm very skeptical. I continue to be skeptical for a whole number of reasons. Primary among them, the legislation itself, which I think is a pretty dangerous piece of work. So what you had was this very general mobilization about corruption, using people's anger, very real and valid anger against the system, to push through this very specific legislation, or to attempt to push through this very specific piece of legislation which is very, very regressive according to me. But my skepticism ranges through a whole host of issues which has to do with history, politics, culture, symbolism. All of it made me extremely uncomfortable, and I also thought that it had the potential to turn from something inclusive, or what was being marketed or touted as being inclusive, to something very divisive and dangerous. So I'm quite happy that it's over for now.
Just to come back to your article, you've said that Arvind Kejriwal and Manish Sisodia have received $400,000 from the Ford Foundation. That was one of the reasons why you were skeptical about this movement. Why did you make it a point to put in the fact that Arvind Kejriwal is funded by the Ford Foundation?
See, I think just in order to point to the fact, in a short article you can just indicate the fact that it is in some ways an NGO-driven movement. Kiran Bedi, Arvind Kejriwal, Sisodia, all these people run NGOs. 3 of the core members are Magsaysay Award winners, which is endowed by Ford Foundation and Rockefeller. And I wanted to point to the fact that what is it about these NGOs funded by World Bank or Ford and so on? Why are they participating in sort of mediating what public policy should be? I actually went to the World Bank site recently and found that the World Bank runs 600 anti-corruption programs just in places like sub-Saharan Africa. Why is the World Bank that interested in anti-corruption? I looked at 5 of the major points they made, and I thought it was remarkable if you let me read them out. 1, increasing political accountability. 2, strengthening civil society participation. 3, creating a competitive private sector. 4, instituting restraints on power. 5, improving public sector management. So it explained to me why in this World Bank, Ford Foundation, these people are all involved in increasing the penetration of international capital. And so it explains why, at a time when we are all so worried about corruption, the major parts of what corruption meant in terms of corporate corruption, in terms of how NGOs and corporations are taking over the traditional functions of government, but that whole thing was left out. And this is copybook World Bank agenda. They may not have meant it, but that's what's going on, and it worries me a lot. It wasn't some, certainly Anna Hazare was picked up and propped up as the sort of saint of the masses, but he wasn't driving the movement. He wasn't the brains behind the movement. And I think this is something very pertinent that we really need to worry about. It's not the same thing as a people's movement that's risen from the bottom. It's very much something that surely lots of people joined it. All of them were not BJP, all of them were not middle class. Many of them came to a sort of reality show that was orchestrated by even a very campaigning media. But what was this bill about? This bill was very, very worrying to me.
Just to re-emphasize the point about Medha Patkar and Prashant Bhushan, these are old-time associates of yours in activism, and they're deeply involved in this particular movement. How do you react to them being involved in this movement, of which you're so critical?
Well, with some dismay, because I mean, Prashant is a very close friend of mine and I respect Medha a lot. But I think that their credibility has been cashed in on in some ways, but I feel badly that they are part of it.
You said both the Maoists and the Jan Lokpal Bill movement have one thing in common. They both seek the overthrow of the Indian state. Why do you believe that the movement for the Jan Lokpal Bill is similar to the Maoist movement in seeking the overthrow of the Indian state?
Well, let's separate the movement from the bill. As I said, I don't even believe that most people knew exactly what the provisions of the bill were, who were part of the movement, very few in the media and on the ground. But if you study that bill carefully, you see the creation of a parallel oligarchy. You see that the Jan Lokpal itself, the bench, the 10 people plus the chairman, they are selected by a pool of very elite people, and they are an elite people. I mean, if you look at one of the phases, it says the search committee, which is the committee that's going to shortlist the names of the people who will be chosen for the Jan Lokpal, will shortlist from eminent individuals or such class of people whom they deem fit. So you create this panel from this pool, and then you start. You have a bureaucracy which has policing powers, the power to tap your phones, the power to prosecute, the power to transfer, the power to judge, the power to do things which are really and from the Prime Minister down to the bottom. It's really like a parallel power which has lost the accountability or whatever little accountability a representative government might have. But I'm not one of those who's critiquing it from the point of view of, say, someone like Aruna Roy or Nikhil, who have a less draconian version of the bill. I mean, I'm talking about it from a different point of view altogether. Of firstly, the fact that we need to define what do we mean by corruption, and then what does it mean to those who are disempowered and disenfranchised to have two oligarchies instead of one reigning over them.
And you believe that the reason why this movement is misconceived is because it's centered around this Jan Lokpal bill.
Can we at least discuss what we mean by corruption? Is it just financial irregularity, or is it the currency of social transaction in a very unequal society? Some people, poor people in villages, have to pay bribes to get their ration cards, to get their NREGA dues from very powerful vested interests. Then you have a middle class, you have honest businessmen who cannot run an honest business because of all sorts of reasons. They are out there angry. You have a middle class which actually bribes to buy itself scarce favors. And on the top you have the corporations, the politicians looting millions in mines and so on. But you also have a huge number of people who are outside the legal framework because they don't have pattas, because they live in slums, they don't have legal housing, they are selling their wares on radies. So they are illegal. And in an anti-corruption law is naturally sort of pinned to an accepted legality. So you can talk about the rule of law when all your laws are designed to perpetuate the inequality that exists in Indian society. If you're not going to question that, I'm really not someone who's that interested in the debate then.
But just to come back to the movement again, don't you think that the political class has become corrupted and has become venal? And when you have a movement like this, it does function as a wake-up call?
To some extent, yes. But I think by focusing on the political class and leaving out the corporations, the media that they own, the NGOs that are taking over functions, governmental functions like health, and corporates are now dealing with what governments used to deal with. Why are they left out? So I think a much more comprehensive view would have made me comfortable, even though I keep saying that for me the real issue is what is it that has created a society in which 830 million people live on less than 20 rupees a day, and you have more poor people than all of the poor countries of Africa put together.
So basically what you're saying is that it's not the battle against corruption which is the primary battle, it's the battle for justice that has to be the primary battle in India. Let's take a short break and come back.